to the lowest. So, if he hangs 27 touchdowns and throws for 4,200 yards, I think that is probably going to come along with 13, 14, 15 interceptions. Welcome in to the Hot Read podcast for Wednesday, May the 29th. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, director of published content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We're also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network. You can follow me on social media at Easton Freeze. I'm joined as always by producer JT, who you can follow on social media at JT_Runke. JT, how are you?
I'm good. Memorial weekend, or I guess Memorial Day weekend, was a success. I forgot the day part, because it was a weekend.
I think it's Memorial weekend. It's a long weekend. The holiday's the whole thing. Technically, it's Monday. But, that's what we're celebrating. Friday to Monday, I think, is the vibe.
Yeah, but it was a great weekend, hanging out with some pals. Doing football things. Now we're here. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're here and we're
trying to get through the off season, man. It's we're not even really to like the dead season, and I'm already I don't know. I don't know what to do, man.
Well, that's when we have to get creative, and that's what we're doing today. It's not as bad as you want to make it out to be, JT. We've got stuff to talk about. You just have to dig a little deep. You got to plan accordingly, and we have interesting topics lined up. Like today's topic, we're going to go through the expectations for the Titans offensively in 2024, looking at some metrics for individual guys, what to expect from Will Levis, what kind of total yardage, touchdowns, interceptions, what are those numbers going to look like for him in a Brian Callahan offense? How does Joe Burrow in the Bengals offenses inform that? How does his rookie season inform that? What can we garner from the past to tell us about the future on Will Levis? How about the wide receiver situation the Titans have? These three guys, kind of a unique situation, looking to the Bengals and Brian Callahan's past as well, and looking at each of these guys coming from different situations in recent years, how they're going to look in their different roles. What are the roles going to be? How do we think it's going to stack up with the guys at the top, and who's going to receive the greatest target share? Looking at the running backs, a question that has been asked a couple of times this offseason so far. Tyjae Spears, Tony Pollard, what's the difference between these guys? How are they going to be utilized? Is it going to be a true tandem of like styles where it's just a stable and you're going 50-50 fresh legs? Is that the idea? Are they going to be doing slightly different things, or do their skill sets dictate they will be utilized in different ways? And then finally, the tight ends. You've got Chig, you've got Josh Whyle. Kind of it. You signed Nick Vanette the other week, so he might be a red zone target, but he's not going to be a big volume guy for you in the passing game. But what's the deployment of those guys going to look like? Last year, Chig was the number 2 receiver for the Titans. If that happens again this year, there's going to be a lot of problems. That's not where you want to end up. So where do you want to end up with Chig? What do you want his stat line to look like? All of that and more on today's episode. So we're going to dive into those things for a couple of minutes. We've got another show, of course, programmed this week just to do some housekeeping. We will be back at Titans OTAs tomorrow on Wednesday. So when this episode comes out on podcast, if you're listening in post in the podcast feed, we are probably at Titans OTAs right now. Go to Twitter at Easton Freeze, at Hot Read Pod, at JT_Runke. Check out the stuff that we've got from the second open OTA. We'll be talking to some new guys tomorrow. We put in some requests to talk to certain guys that hopefully we'll get, some guys that I think you want to hear from, some guys that we certainly want to hear from. So we'll see if PR hooks us up with some of those guys, and we get to speak to some big offseason narrative gentlemen and guys we've talked a lot about but not talked to recently. And then we'll be talking on Thursday, the Thursday episode, Thursday Live, that is, in the afternoon, about all the things we saw and all the things that we heard at that practice. So tune in on Thursday. But today's show, we can get started after we tell you got to go and subscribe to our YouTube channel, because JT, I think you've got it. Our live count here. We are three subscribers away from 1,000, a goal that we've been chugging along, trucking towards since we kind of took over the Broadway Sports Media YouTube channel in the fall, posting daily live streams and shorts and clips from the show. We're almost there, and 1,000 is a big number for us. If you're not subscribed to the Hot Read or to the Hot Read Podcast's home on YouTube, which is Broadway Sports Media on YouTube, please do that for us. Be one of the 3. Get in right under the rope here. Be one of the 3 that can say we were one of the first 1,000 subscribers to the Hot Read Podcast, to Broadway Sports Media on YouTube. And we would love if today is the day you make that decision to hit 1K. It's going to happen here, maybe by the end of the show. Who knows? If 3 of you kind souls decide to hit that subscribe button, we would be greatly appreciative of that. And hit like on the episode while you are there on YouTube. If you're watching on Twitter or if you're watching on Facebook, leave those places. Head on over to YouTube. Find the live stream there under Broadway Sports Media, and hit subscribe while you're there. Okay, let's start with the quarterback situation, JT. And I want to look at this from it's going to be kind of a free-flowing conversation. I want us to talk through this and come to a consensus at the end of it. I've got the stats pulled up here for Will Levis and Joe Burrow. And you look at what Levis did in his rookie season. 1,800 yards, 8 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. That was over the course of 9 games played. Let's start with where they were with Joe Burrow in the 2 years that he was healthy, because it's kind of difficult to track the history of the Callahan offense through Burrow because of the fact that of his 4 years playing from 2020 to 2023, he has really only played 2 full seasons in there. It's, dealt with season-ending injuries in 2020 and 2023, and so I'm going to be looking primarily at 22 and 21 just to get more of a, hey, look, somebody subscribed. Thank you. Just two away, folks.
2 away. We'll just keep popping back
by the end of this episode. Let's do it. Let's get to 1,000.
I'm just going to keep popping back in and out, Well, I'm going to just interrupt you and I'm just going to be like, breaking news.
One more subscriber. But at his peak, Brian Callahan was obviously operating an offense or helping operate an offense in Cincinnati that was super pass heavy. Joe Burrow throwing for 46 and 4,400 yards in 2021 and 2022. 520 attempts and 606 attempts respectively. That's not what the Titans have been for a long time. And I'm not sure they're going to go immediately into that style of offense. Brian Callahan's talked a lot this offseason about how he's going to cater the way that he operates this team to the players that he has. And that's, of course, the correct way, the wise way to go about it. Will Levis has the talent to be a volume passer, but is it going to be in the same way as Joe Burrow? We've been talking about this since February, right? When they brought on Brian Callahan. Hey, Joe Burrow's more of an underneath, inside the numbers, middle of the field, dink and dunk kind of guy. Let's throw the screen. Not to say that he can't throw downfield, and he has successfully in his career, but he's a volume passer that is going to tear you to shreds by 1,000 cuts, kind of, right? And with Will Levis, at least in his rookie year, he demonstrated this is a guy that's going to be throwing 10, 15 yards downfield pretty much every time he uncorks it, throwing outside the numbers, down the sideline, go balls, seam routes that are just goes up the middle of the field. That's his deal, and it's less of a volume kind of attack. You're gonna utilize play action more. All of these things that are just it's a different style of passing. Now that was under Vrabel, and that was in a different situation with different players. Do you think? I guess what I'm trying to get at here, JT, is how similar to the Joe Burrow style offense, the Joe Burrow style of volume, right? 600 attempts, 4,600 yards. Do you think they're going to try to get with Will Levis?
It's tough, right? Because like you said, they're two totally different players. But I think we can look past what Brian Callahan did with the Bengals and kind of go back through his history where we start to see Will Levis's traits kind of align with some of the quarterbacks he's worked with in the past. A guy like Peyton Manning, a guy like Matthew Stafford, these huge arms that were just absolutely unleashing it down the field is a lot different than what Joe Burrow. And like you said, not to say that Joe Burrow can't do that as well, but the Cincinnati offense, like you said, thrives on yards after the catch and having these really good receivers just, slice you up. Like you said, death by 1,000 cuts. I think that maybe we might see a little bit of a return to where things Brian Callahan has learned in the past, finally being able to take over the play calling duties because, in Cincinnati, he wasn't exactly the play caller. He was more developing the scheme around what Zach Taylor was actually calling during the games. But when you look at what they could potentially do here in Tennessee here outside of Cincinnati, you have three really, really good wide receivers who, are not exactly the yak threats, but that when you throw that ball up, they have a better chance than not to come down with it. And I think
Right,
that's
it's not
what
a perfect one-to-one fit. Well, obviously Tyler Boyd literally is, but the
is
other
just,
two guys,
transplant
you
right
don't
in there.
have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins in Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins. It's a different style, but they are still all four volume receivers, all four guys that you want to get the ball into their hands to go let them cook downfield.
Right. And I think that, Kenneth in the comments here brings up an interesting point. I think he says it will be similar to Joe Burrow. Callahan has talked a lot about upping the accuracy for Levis, which could mean a lot more short to intermediate passes. And if that's the case, good. But like we said, and why I'm still so skeptical about how they might roll out Will Levis this year, right? The accuracy is a huge thing. We talk about how last year, only 4 interceptions to those 8 touchdowns, but how many plays could 4 interceptions turn into 12 last season for Will Levis? Because if, a receiver or a defenseman comes down with the ball,
just catches the ball that's thrown directly at him
instead of this absolute bullet just bouncing off their helmet.
Volleyball setting it up into the air.
Right.
So or you don't have DeAndre Hopkins playing cornerback for you when the ball is thrown near him but not to him. Right.
So I think that the key to you seeing a more Joe Burrow style offense is what Kenneth points out there and what Brian Callahan has alluded to. Will Levis is going to have to fix, a lot of the accuracy issues in his game for them to get there. If he can't, that's where I start to think that you're going to still see Will Levis from last year where, it's only 20 to 25 passes. But if they can, work some of that stuff out, I see no reason why Will Levis couldn't get all the way. I'm not going to say he's going to throw 40 times a game. I think that would be overkill for a Will Levis, still unproven Will Levis. But I could see a world where we're getting to 28, 29, 30 throws a game for Will Levis this season.
On average, right? And a part of this is trying to predict what kind of team, what kind of success the Titans are going to have. Because, if this is a pass-heavy offense by identity, and they're playing a handful of teams this year where they may be trailing. I mean, they could be up in Detroit late in the fall and be trailing by 3 touchdowns the entirety of the second half, in which case they're going to be throwing the ball around the yard. Like you may have a Will Levis 57 attempt game, not because that was the game plan, but because that's what the game dictated must happen. Kenneth also points out, Kenneth coming in hot today with the assists in the comments, about how Tyler Boyd has also made specific comments that the playbook is identical or almost identical to what they did in Cincinnati. Yeah, last week when we were there speaking with him for the first time, he did say, I kind of already know the playbook because it's pretty much the same as what I knew in Cincinnati. So I have that leg up on some of these guys in terms of knowing the situation, knowing the scheme. Of course, it's going to be similar. And so that's another reason why I think you can say, this may be a similar situation to what Callahan was doing with Burrow in Cincinnati. In terms of considering how the situation is going to impact them, at first I'm like, well, it might be a worse team because, those two Joe Burrow full seasons were both, I think they're both division winners, if I'm not mistaken, both playoff teams at the very least. One was a Super Bowl run team. And they both were double-digit win. Like they were very, very good teams, top 5 offenses in the NFL those 2 years. And so is that where the Titans are going to be this year? Probably not. So you kind of have to you have to bring back those numbers and say it's going to be a little bit less than that in I think an average world, an average outcome. But then when you consider okay, is Will Levis going to have the protection that Joe Burrow had? Probably, because those 2 years, what was the talking point? Joe Burrow, holy cow, 51 sacks in 2021, 41 sacks in 2022. He was getting hit a lot back there. And last year, Will Levis endured 28 sacks in 9 games. So he was well on his way to the 50s if he had played a full season. But in that offense with Callahan, and they did a good job those years of, the talking point was, they don't have the protection for Burrow, but Titans fans know firsthand, you can sack the guy 9 times in a single game. and they're still going to throw the ball around the yard and have a lot of success passing because they get the ball out quickly. They scheme around it. They move the pocket. They boot. They roll out. Like they find ways to not let the Titans of old. How many games can you think back to, JT, where it's like, well, the passing game sucked, and it was because they couldn't. Like this team's passing game was predicated on having some time, and they had no time, and they had no solutions to not having any time. Your hands are tied when you can't pass protect, but smart coordinators, smart coaches can find ways around truly being shut down. And the Titans haven't been great with that recently. I think even if, and God forbid, this offensive line better be better than this year with that additions they've made. And Bill Callahan.
On last week's episode, I confirmed it, so it's going to happen.
Exactly. It's going to be better. Yep. That's never come back to bite anybody in the butt when you say that. But even if he gets sacked 45, 50 times this year, I don't see any reason why it still won't be a volume passing attack, a successful passing attack.
Yeah. And like you said, ways to scheme around, when things get in trouble. And the best example of that is last year, Brian Callahan in Cincinnati having to deal with that Joe Burrow injury. He was throwing Joe Burrow throws the ball very fast and gets the ball out really quick. Mm-hmm. But then they were like, we need to ×2 this. We need him to get it out even faster last year because of that injury. And they were able, didn't have the most success, but that's exactly how you had to play with that injury. Same thing I'm not saying that that's what they're going to do with Will Levis, but having a guy who can also, find a workaround, remake the offense for when Jake Browning has to come in and find what works and what doesn't. That's something that's the telltale signs of a good coordinator who's going to make this work for the quarterback. I think also while we're still talking about quarterbacks before we move on, we have a couple comments here. Adam asking, why is it always about his dropped interceptions? What about him being top 3 in dropped passes by his wide receivers and dropped touchdowns? That would bring up his accuracy number. And I would say, sure, definitely. It goes both ways. But then again,
it's two different conversations, right?
I was about to say,
you cannot ignore the turnover worthy play percentage being past the moon on Mars. It was so ridiculous last year compared to the actual turnovers, right? He got very lucky. It is also true that he got very, very unlucky in terms of how often his receivers were catching the ball. Traylon Burks, a 75-yard bomb placed perfectly on his hands, and he drops it. That was also a thing that we regularly saw every single game. It was, holy cow, what a drop by the offense, and holy cow, what a drop by the defense, because he was throwing it to everybody.
And I will say, if there weren't not injury concerns, but accuracy concerns and foot concerns with Will Levis, that things that he needs to work through to make sure that he is the guy, he would have been a first round pick then. There still is the issues behind this, whether it is the wide receivers or not. Throwing to those guys is a result of his accuracy and footwork needing to get better, and his processing, knowing when to throw the ball and when to hold it. These decision-making things as well are a big reason of why he fell to the second round, why this is such a big year for him to prove it.
You look at the Vegas numbers. I went to DraftKings before we got on today to look at what they think Will Levis's passing total is going to be this year. It's set at 3,400 yards. That is right at 200 yards per game in a 17-game season. That is right at what he did last year. He averaged 200.9 yards per game in his 9 starts. For reference, in the Cincinnati offense, Joe Burrow, over his 4 years, has averaged 270.8 yards per game from 2020 to 2024. So 70 more yards on average passing than what Levis did, and granted, a very small sample size last year. Also in those 4 years, for reference with Burrow, 1.9 touchdowns per game, 0.7 interceptions per game. I think that Vegas number is very low, and either is factoring in him not playing 17 games, or the Titans, it's probably a reflection of, hey, Vegas thinks the Titans are going to win 6.5 games, that, they're going to be a bad team, so you're not going to have much in the way of passing success. I think that is dreadfully low. Personally, I think that even if they are a bad team, the way that this offense is going to run, again, you may have some 55, 60 attempt games from Will Levis because they're trailing and they're really trying to throw the ball around the yard. my point all offseason, the number one goal this year is not winning. The number one goal is finding out Levis is the guy, getting him as many reps as possible, even in games where you're getting killed. If that were to happen, I think is going to be a priority of theirs. They're not going to shut it down and like, okay, we're just going to pound the rock and get out of here. That doesn't serve their purpose for this season. And when you look at I wanted to see what the Titans refresh myself on what the Titans franchise looks like in terms of passing. It's not great historically. There's only been 2 instances of a quarterback passing for over 4,000 yards in a season, and that was Warren Moon in 1990 and 1991. Number 3 and number 4 in terms of total yards were both Ryan Tannehill in 2020 and 2021, so exactly 30 years later. But neither of those seasons, despite them being really strong, I mean, the Titans' offenses were top 10, top 5 during those stretches in the league, still shy of 4,000 yards, 3,700 and 3,600 yards in those 2 seasons. And so here's my question to you, JT. Is it reasonable with this new offense, with the expected growth with Will Levis that we think we're going to see, to say a 4,000 yard season in year 2 is the expectation?
I mean, with the way that they're taking this offense, it kind of has to be, right? Like,
I think so.
With the way that they want to emphasize the passing attack, the way they're bringing in all of these mouths to feed, giving Will Levis as many options as possible, it feels like that is the goal, right? To not have him try to hit that mark would be, what is a Calvin Ridley? What is a Tyler Boyd? What are all these guys for, if not to throw the ball a lot? Like bringing Tony Pollard in to throw out of the backfield. Like these are guys, Chig taking another step in his game. Like these guys are all going to demand targets, and Brian Callahan is giving Will Levis a lot of options. So I think that is pretty fair to say, in my opinion.
For reference, 4,000 yards, if you play all 17 games, is just 235 yards passing per game. 35 more yards per game than what Will Levis did last season in his 9 starts. I think that is perfectly reasonable. If I had to, and we don't necessarily have to do this for every guy today, but I'm just going to put out what I think is my reasonable expectation for Will Levis from a statistical standpoint in 2024. I think, bridging that gap between Burrow, 270 yards per game, Levis, 200 yards per game in their 2 careers, I think something like 245-ish yards per game is probably within the realm of possibility, which comes out to, 4,100, almost 4,200 yards passing over this course of the season, 4,165 to be exact. And then in terms of touchdowns, I don't know if Burrow averaging 2 touchdowns per game, I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case. But even if he throws, 1.5 touchdowns per game, that puts you at 25 touchdowns. I'm going to say 27 touchdowns this year. And then interception wise, I wouldn't be shocked to see him get into double-digit interceptions, just the kind of that cowboy in him, that renegade play style where they're going to have to try to reel that in. That's not going to be an overnight, wow, this guy went from the highest turnover-worthy play rate in the league to the lowest. So, if he hangs 27 touchdowns and throws for 4,200 yards, I think that is probably going to come along with 13, 14, 15 interceptions, to be honest with you. I think that's reasonable, and I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily.
I don't think so either. I think I might be with you there, that I'd be probably looking in the 15 to 16 interception range, because you have to think, once again, 6.5 wins. Vegas definitely doesn't think that this team is going to, win a lot of games, which means the Titans are going to be down a lot in these games. And what we saw from last year with Will Levis, you can look back to the Pittsburgh game. That's where, trying to play from behind, that's where Will Levis really gets into trouble. And that's where he throws those interceptions at the end of games. So like, just the Will Levis, who he is as a passer, mixed in with the situational ball of, being down by so much or whatever, and just having to rip it. Like, I think there is a very real chance that even with the good numbers that he could put up in this pass first offense now, those interceptions more than likely will come with it.
Okay. Do you want to, let's move on to, let's do the receivers next. Actually, no, let's do the running backs and then we'll do receivers, because we've talked a lot about passing. Let's cleanse the palate for a moment and talk about expected roles. You've got Tyjae Spears and Tony Pollard on this team 2 times this season. Once was my question to the Titans running back coach and once was last week a question to Brian Callahan from somebody else in the media pool. The idea of, hey, these guys seem sort of like it's not Derrick Henry and Tyjae Spears, where clearly these are two different birds of a feather. They are going to do different things. You can look at them once with your eyeballs and say, those guys do different things. That's not the case with Spears and with Pollard. So are they going to be super similar play styles? Are they going to be utilized in different ways? Is it going to be a true split? What's the receiving versus rushing? What's the plan, at least with these two guys? I'm going to give you what I think they want to do, JT, and you can either agree or disagree and give your thoughts. I think they are going to utilize Pollard more in the traditional running back role and Spears more in the change of pace, scat back, out of the backfield receiver role. Now, that's not to say that I don't think they're going to hand the ball off to Spears. I do. But I think when it comes down to it, if you told me at the end of the year, Pollard got, he got 60% of the carries. He had 60% of the yards rushing, whereas Spears was 60% yards and receiving targets on the pass catching side. That's kind of where I think they're going to come down with it. I think their skill sets lend themselves to those roles. I think the yards after catch ability with Spears as an underneath option, as a guy in the flat, you work it to him on a screen and just let the guy go to work. That freaky athleticism that he has, get a head full of steam on outside the numbers like that. That's where I would want to be using him most often. And I think that's what they're going to end up doing.
Yeah, I have to agree with you because, from the second that they signed Tony Pollard, it felt to me like that this team, and specifically Brian Callahan, kind of wants to recreate what they did in Cincinnati. You bring in Tony Pollard to be that Joe Mixon type of guy. He's kind of a little bit in that same mold of a Joe Mixon, right? He's a little bit older in his career, maybe in the middle to the back end of his prime. This guy who's going to be getting the ball, a decent amount every game. In the last two seasons, Joe Mixon had 257 and 210 carries in those two seasons. Playing that role where he's the guy that you're going to pound the rock with when you need to. And then you have the guy who is that change of pace in Cincinnati over the last 2 years. In 2022, it was Samaje Perine, and in 2023 was the electric lightning bolt of Chase Brown. Like, I think that's where you start to see Tyjae Spears be able to find a role in this offense in that, Samaje Perine, Chase Brown role in 2022, where Samaje Perine played every game. He had 95 carries for 394 yards. And 2 touchdowns as well in that season. So I could see definitely him fitting into that type of role, except probably on steroids because of how good Tyjae Spears is and how much they should definitely utilize him in this offense. So I definitely see that maybe Tony Pollard gets more of the gritty, shove it down your throat kind of role. And then you give Tyjae Spears the super sexy, designed throws and plays out of the backfield.
Right. There's going to be less opportunities in terms of rushing. The Titans, in 2022, 460 attempts. In 2023, 420 attempts. For reference, Cincinnati in 2022, for example, a full year with Joe Burrow, 370 attempps. Last year, maybe more heavy on the rushing. No, just kidding. I was just guessing based on the fact that they lost Burrow. Even less rushing attempts that year, 353. That maybe that's a reflective of them trailing more often and having to pass more often. That makes some sense there. The point being, I think the 350 to 370 range in terms of total handoffs this season is where they're going to be residing. And so it makes for an interesting comparison when you try to look at what Tony Pollard is going to be. The last 2 years in Dallas, he puts up 1,000 yards in each. But that was him as the main, the bell cow guy, primarily the main guy. He's not going to, I don't think he's going to be that here. I think it's going to be a 50-50 split. Now, when you go back to when it was Zeke and Pollard, and he was the change of pace guy for the Dallas Cowboys, that was not 50-50. You had Zeke almost getting 300 snaps and Tony getting 150. So it was kind of a 2/3, 1/3 kind of deal. But even then, on 130 attempts, Pollard put up 719 yards. I think that is closer to realistic. Vegas has his rushing total this year set at 800 something last I checked. So that I think that's reasonable. I think both guys being in the 700, 800 yard rushing range, if Pollard comes out with more yards, that's kind of to be expected for me. Last year, just to look at what Tyjae did, 100 rushing attempts, 450 yards, and then receiving wise, 50 receptions for almost 400 yards. So the you know, 2 times as many handoffs, but almost the same in terms of total yardage. I think you could see that ultimately being the situation for him if in 2024 he has 150 handoffs and 107 targets, and it's kind of a 50-50 split where he's got 600 yards rushing, 600 yards receiving. That's kind of where I think he's going to fall.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. But once again, I feel like just with what this offense is doing, it's going to be a total crapshoot on that one. 800, I think, is probably on the high side for Tony Pollard this year. Just not because I don't think that he could obtain it. I just think the way that they're going to use him is going to lend itself to being more of that. I think I could see him around 700, 650, 700 yards range, where Tyjae Spears is going to be that explosive guy. I would love to see a Tyjae Spears 800-yard, coming out party this year and
Sure.
use him. We saw those flashes in almost every game last year for Tyjae Spears. If we can see him more consistently, I have no doubt that he can definitely get there.
I agree. So I think we can move on, and let's get the tight ends out of the way before we get into the big wide receiver discussion, because I don't have a ton to say. The main question I want to pose, and I think it was our buddy Herndon on F Words last week talking about, or maybe 2 weeks ago talking about this, but the idea of, are we sure that Chig Okonkwo is going to be the tight end 1 in this offense? Are we sure they aren't going to utilize Josh Whyle just as much, if not more, than Chig, based on the way that the Bengals offenses of the recent past have operated from the tight end standpoint? They've you're the Bengals fan here, so you can say with more authority than I can, they're not big on the star tight end train. That's never been their thing. A big part of that is because they've not needed to in the passing game. You got 3 awesome receivers. Why would you be throwing the ball for 1,000 yards to your top tight end when you could just get it in the receiver's hands? But their best receiver last year from a tight end standpoint was Tanner Hudson,
The
350
next Travis
yards.
Kelce, baby. Tanner
Right,
Hudson,
350 yards
Kelce.
was actually their wide receiver. Wait, am I getting that right? Was it Tanner Hudson?
It's either Tanner Hudson or Drew Sample, one of the two.
It was
because
Hudson.
Irv Smith could not stay healthy. So,
Right. It was Hudson. He was their wide receiver 5. And again, last year, when you look at what Chig did, he was the wide receiver 2 on this team, 528 yards to DeAndre Hopkins being the clear, the only guy even close to 1,000 yards last year for the Titans. I don't think you're getting another 500 yard season out of Chig, because you're going to have so much of the volume passing going to these receivers, going to the running backs out of the backfield. Chig had 74 targets, 54 receptions last year. Tanner Hudson, being the number 1 tight end last year for the Bengals, only 49 targets, 39 receptions. I think that right around 40 to 50 targets for the top tight end is probably what you're going to expect. So 300 to 400 yards there. But with Whyle, he's that bigger body, huge target, not quite as athletic, not quite as valuable as a run after catch guy, that you're going to line up in line. You're going to have him go on seam routes and just throw the ball up to the big boy, and he'll catch it with that crazy catch radius of his. I wouldn't be shocked if he's used more often than we saw last year. Year 2 for him. He's on the same footing as Chig now because they're both learning a new system. He could kind of fill that Drew Sample, Tanner Hudson role if it's a 1-for-1 situation. Callahan's wanting to plug in the tight end on this team who can fill that role. He might say, I kind of think it's Josh Whyle maybe more than it is a Chig Okonkwo.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that when you think of Josh Whyle, just the tight end, rotunda, I guess you could call it, the turnstile of just kind of middling tight ends that Cincinnati has gone through at the last couple of years. Hayden Hurst, CJ Uzomah, Irv Smith, now Mike Gesicki, Tanner Hudson, and Drew Sample are all guys that, kind of fit that Josh Whyle mold. And where they are the most effective in the Cincinnati offense the past couple of years has been in the red zone. So I think if we see a season out of Josh Whyle where this was the case, we're going to see him as a big red zone threat, which is kind of the reason he was brought in anyways and drafted last year, to be that, a red zone threat. I think Chig Okonkwo is really the biggest wild card in all of this. Like, I mean,
I don't
a
see
tight
where
end
he
like
fits. Where does he fit in this offense?
Right.
And if there's an odd man out, that's where he's my favorite to be the guy.
Most likely, unfortunately, I have to agree with you on that. I think if there is any hope, he can fit more into that Tanner Hudson role. They used Tanner Hudson last year a lot on those special, games where Burrow needed to get the ball out quick. Tanner Hudson was the guy that was able to be in the middle of the
break
field.
Glass in case of emergency, dump off guy.
But
yeah.
I mean, he did have some yards after the catchability as well. That's where I think Chig can really shine. I think that there is an opportunity for Brian Callahan to kind of break the mold a little bit, see what they have in Chig Okonkwo as this huge yard after the catch playmaker guy, and say, we could really scheme up some stuff here where he could have some big moments. And like you said, I think we see more maybe big moments in designed plays from Chig Okonkwo this season, but we don't see a full on, like you said, like last year, 500 to 600 yards. He's not going to be used as regularly, but when he is, I think that there's a really decent chance that it's going to have some big play potential.
Right. So we'll see. I mean, with Chig, if you told me they're really wanting to, and as Stoney says here, it can be a fun matchup guy. He may really be a guy that they key in on in specific games because of the matchups they're going to get. Because if you get him on a really weak, defender in the middle of the field, he can expose those guys. He can make them look silly. And so there may be 2 or 3 games this year where it's like, oh wow, Chig was the second, he's wide receiver 2. Yeah, had 6 catches for 97 yards today, a big Chig day. But I think it's going to come more in a designed look kind of situation than it's going to be a, he was the dump off. He schemed in as an option in the progression, and he's getting a fourth of the targets or whatever it is. So we can move on to the receivers now, JT, and this is where the meat of this discussion comes in. The Titans have 3 big name, star names.
We still need 2 more people.
2 more people. Come on,
subscribe.
I appreciate you bringing this up. Got to sell the show mid-show sometimes. Guys, if you're watching with us live on Twitter or on Facebook or on YouTube, help us out. We're 2 away from 1,000 on YouTube. And we want to get there like today would be nice. That'd be cool if we could let's just do it. Rip the Band-Aid off. 2 brave souls. Come on down, volunteer, hit subscribe. It costs you nothing, and we'll love you forever for it. Be deeply personally indebted to you. So help us out, and we'll go crazy on the show if 2 of you subscribe here in the next 15 minutes. But if not, by the end of the day, that's our goal. By the end of today, we can say we've got 1,000 people signed up for the journey on Probably Sports Media's YouTube
I would like
page.
it. Yeah, I mean, we could always just go create accounts, but I'd like it to be regular people.
Hire a bot army.
Yeah.
We'll be at 10,000 subscribers by sunrise.
Oh, one away. Oh my God,
guys. Okay, now you know what?
Yes!
Now
There we go.
So somebody got tired of us asking and went and created 2 accounts. That's 100% what just happened. Shane saying, "I will create an account and get it done." Please tell me how. Shane, we will answer any questions you have, my friend. Please tell me. What do you ask? Tell me how we can not win the South. We are stacked, Shane. Listen, my friend, you got a lot of big names on this team. 100%. There's a lot of big names on these other teams in the AFC South, though. So it's gonna be a tight one. And maybe 2024 is not the Titans' year, but 2025, if all things in 2024 go to plan, that would set them up nicely to be a favorite or a co-favorite in 2025. So we'll see. I think it's a year where you got to temper your expectations, but they got the upside to potentially be a troublesome team in the AFC. So we appreciate
and Shane
you. And
can also be the special 1,001 subscriber. Who's going to be that one? I don't know.
Maybe, I mean, he could have done it, and then this came through. So I don't know. He was the 1,000th, but just because we hit 1,000 doesn't mean stop subscribing.
Let's get to 2,000 tonight, baby. Let's go.
We're gonna hold this episode hostage. We're not gonna quit streaming until we get to 2,000.
That's
so
how
you're gonna have to keep listening to us until we get to that number. No, back to the receivers here, and we really appreciate you guys for helping us get to that number. We've been asking for a while, and we got it done. So that's awesome. The history with Callahan, with the wide receivers, and the way that the way that they target these guys. It's a volume situation. In 2022, again, the last full year with Burrow, where you had mostly a healthy Chase, Higgins, and Boyd. Higgins and Boyd played 16 games. Jamar played 12. Even so, Jamar out-targeted the other two pretty significantly, 127 looks. T. Higgins had 104. Tyler Boyd had 80. Where do we expect the Titans three guys in Ridley and Hopkins and Boyd to come in? Boyd's going to be the three. Like, I think it's a pretty 1-to-1 situation. I think in this offense, Tyler Boyd is going to get 60 to 80 targets this year and be that solid third option. It may be less than he did with the Bengals just because he's getting older. You know, they may not be as successful as the Bengals passing game was those years that they were really humming. And I think there are objectively more talented mouths to feed on this offense in terms of the running backs that you can pass to, the tight ends that you can pass to. And then the receivers beyond Boyd. Treylon Burks has the potential to carve out a 400-yard role for himself this year and eat up some of those targets, eat up some of those snaps. So we can't discount that. But that being said, with Ridley and Hopkins, I feel like we've kind of, as a media, danced around this idea, or people just have wildly conflicting ideas, but nobody cares to actually argue it out. Who's going to be the one here? DeAndre Hopkins, you go back through his career, the last time he was not the number one option on whatever offense he was playing in was his rookie year in 2013. He had 802 yards, but then every year after that, he has had 1,000 yards or was on pace to have 1,000 yards. Outside of 2016, where he had 954, so just short of 1,000 yards. Like, he's been the guy everywhere he's gone. With Ridley, that's not been the case. And you look back to those 2 years where he overlapped with Julio Jones while he was still in Atlanta, 3 years technically, but 2 years of healthy Jones. And in those 2 years, he still put up 800 yards. That was a pass-heavy offense. Matt Ryan slinging the ball around the field. Don't get me wrong. So, you know, that could be where he falls even as a 2 or a 1B if Hopkins is still the guy. You could see, 2020 Titans, AJ Brown, Corey Davis, both going for 1,000 or just shy of 1,000 yards. It could be a two 1,000-yard receiver situation for the Titans in 2024 with Ridley and Hopkins. But if you had to stake your claim today, JT, on this guy, he's getting the Jamar Chase share of targets. He's going to get 20-30% more targets than the other guy. Is it Hopkins or is it Ridley?
You kind of already laid out my argument to say that it is DeAndre Hopkins, I think.
Okay.
And for me, it's pretty clear for DeAndre Hopkins. Like you said, he really hasn't been the not a number one receiver on his team since 2013. I think, that there's enough sample size there to feel pretty good about that claim, first of all. Second of all, I think that the chemistry really matters. Outside of Tyler Boyd and Calvin Ridley, like, they need to continue to build chemistry with Will Levis. Will Levis was already just absolutely just throwing. He was trying to fit the football into a DeAndre Hopkins sized hole every single play. Like, that's what he
didn't have much other options, to be fair, but he was doing that. Yeah.
But I don't see any reason for that not to continue to happen, right? He has this guy in his room that even when it's been, rough and bad with a pretty, lackluster group.
Rough and bad. It has been, yeah.
He had Hopkins then, right? He had him. I don't see why that trust would go away now that you put a Calvin Ridley and a Tyler Boyd. Not to say that they're going to get their own, but I think based on, the history of DeAndre Hopkins and the connection that he already has, I think it's pretty safe for me to say that I still think DeAndre Hopkins will be the one in this offense.
Yeah, the counter argument there is that, hey, the last 2 full seasons that Calvin Ridley was the one in the offense, which was the last 2 full seasons he played in 2020 and then in 2023. He had 1,300 yards and 1,000 yards in those 2 seasons. He had roughly 140 targets in those 2 seasons. He's younger than he's 2 years, 3 years younger than DeAndre Hopkins.
5 years younger on paper.
Right. So almost a decade younger on paper, frankly. He may, it's going to be a style situation, because if they're using Ridley as the outside guy, vertical threat, he's our big X that we're going to use downfield pretty exclusively and not really bump him inside much, not use him as an underneath, using it as a crossers guy, then yeah, maybe he is the 2. But if they're going to rotate these guys a lot, and we're going to get an idea of this when we, get to go to more practices tomorrow and then next week, and then in the July, August training camp periods of how they're rotating guys in terms of alignment. If he's moving inside and out as much as DeAndre is, if they're using him all over the field and not just as a prototypical X, I think you could see a season where he is the one, he puts up 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 yards. And, DeAndre Hopkins comes in right at or around 1,000 yards. And so, again, it's still a 1A, 1B situation, but Ridley is the guy. Now, you bring up the chemistry, and I think that's the biggest thing for me here with DeAndre Hopkins having that built-in chemistry already with Will Levis. As Tyler Boyd said in his media availability last week, it takes a while for, you to get on that same wavelength mentally, a quarterback and a receiver. Hopkins and Levis are already there. And so especially early in September, October, when they are trying to get this train on the tracks, trying to get rolling towards the station, and they're trying to figure out a lot of new things, a lot of moving parts on the offensive line, a lot of moving parts with a new offensive scheme, and these weapons being sifted in and out and trying to feed the mouths evenly. And there's going to be a lot of troubleshooting. DeAndre Hopkins might just be the constant for Will Levis in that first month or two of maybe not turmoil, but a lot of cogs in motion, where I just, when in doubt, I'm going to my boy. I'm going to my guy. He had me last year. He'll have me again this year. And so he may come roaring out to a significant lead early and kind of pad his stats for the season in that way. So I'm with you that I lean Hopkins as the one. But here's my ultimate point. Barring one missing significantly more time than the other due to injury or something, I don't see these guys being more than 200 or 300 yards off from one another. I don't see a world in which Calvin Ridley has 1,400 yards and DeAndre Hopkins has 600. That's going to be because DeAndre missed half the season, God forbid, with an injury. If they both play, I think it's going to be the idea is 1,000 to 1,000. That's kind of what we're aiming for.
Yeah, I think so too. Obviously it's May 28th, but if you ask me to give a ballpark number, I say one of them probably sits around 1,100 and the other one probably sits around 850 to 950 is probably where I think we're going to eventually get, which is still really good to have that. And then also Tyler Boyd and everything else as well. There's so many options. Honestly, we could see anybody out of this offense explode and have a surprising season, but Hopkins and Ridley, I think, are going to be the two that really, run up the stat sheet. I
agree. Okay, so those are our expectations. I think that we didn't put hard numbers on anybody besides Levis because that, what's really, if we wanted to do that, we could do that, but who really cares? I think that those are reasonable expectations of these guys. And again, I think a lot of the offensive production this year is kind of agnostic of the success this team has. If you told me, Easton, I need you to come up with a hard prediction on numbers for if the Titans go 6-11 or if the Titans go 10-6 or 10-7. I don't think it's all that different. Obviously, the offense will be more productive. You'll have, it'll be more successful. So you'll have more yards, you'll have more touchdowns, those things. But in terms of total yards of offense, I think that even if they are bad, and it's truly a hard transition year and they're figuring it out and they have some rough stretches to begin. I still think that they're going to be productive offensively because we've seen from Callahan's offenses of the past, the production is kind of agnostic of the success of the team. This offense chugs along and, you may score a lot of points on the team. You may stop them in the red zone. You may create more turnovers. But at the end of the day, they're still going to get their yards.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so that's our show today. Interesting conversation. We'll have a more traditional show for you on Thursday. Again, JT and I will be at OTAs tomorrow at the Titans facility. So make sure if you want to follow live at Easton Freeze, at JT_Runke, at Hot Read Pod. If you want it all in one place, we'll be retweeting everything on at Hot Read Pod. So make sure to check that out tomorrow from,
we do have some questions in the chat if you want to.
Yeah, we'll get to those in a minute. I'm just trying to let people know.
Okay. I didn't know.
What is the time? 11 to 1:30, somewhere in there, midday tomorrow, Central Time. So check that out. Now to get to the comments. The questions in the
I thought you were totally just going to get out of here and I was
no. I'm a man of the people. Still, at my core, I'm a man of the people. And so
even after 1,000 subscribers, you still are a man of the people. You're still, that did not change.
How transactional do you think I am? I create relationships to gain I'm not in it because I'm just love of the game kind of guy. I'm a love of the game kind of guy.
Yeah. Okay.
That wasn't very
That's fine.
you seem to begrudgingly agree or
Sure.
okay.
It's your show, buddy. So we can,
Okay. All right. Anyways, what are these questions? What are these questions?
All right, let's start with this first one here. Kenneth says, I think my most anticipated expectations are on the coaches. Is Bernard Wilson blitz heavy zone? You talked about Callahan passing if he's behind. What's his strategy with the lead? And he said, Vrabel drove me nuts with taking the foot off the gas with the lead.
There's a lot of things there. My ultimate response, Kenneth, and I think we'll dive more into these nitty-gritty things when we get closer to the actual season. But the idea that the Titans used to operate under, which was we want to play every game in a phone booth. We want to keep every game close, no matter even, we don't a team that's way better than us. We want to hang till the end. A team that we're way better than, we're going to limit the variability and we want to keep this game close, even though we should stomp these guys out. Let's get to the fourth quarter, try to have the ball last, score last, and win by, a touchdown or less. I don't think that's going to be the vibe with Callahan. I think it's going to be, let's try to score as many points as we can and kill teams if we can kill them. Variables be damned. Let's go do the thing. Let's get in the end zone. Let's score. We don't need to play a game in a phone booth. Let's go play our game, which is going to be air it out, spread it out, play loose, and have some fun and get into the end zone and score points. Now that might result in some more butt kickings because you're trying to do things that can result in turnovers, that can result in variance, that can result in a ball, just the ball not bouncing your way on any given Sunday. But I think Titans fans will gladly take a couple of big time losses if it means getting a handful more big time wins.
Next question from Awaken says, what do you guys think of the Washington?
No. Use his full name because this is a wild name.
Awaken to the Eternal.com asks, what do you guys think of the Washington UDFA signing in Dylan Johnson? Him and Julius Chestnut can sure add to the ground and pound game in short yard situations. Personally, for me, I think that my favorite UDFA to make the roster is Dylan Johnson. I think he checks all the boxes on what he can do from a pass blocking game, from the the way he catches the ball, the way he can run. He's not the most athletically gifted guy, but his vision is something that I think no other running back it can beat on this roster. And I think that's a big reason why they signed him. I think they really did get a gem here in the UDFA market on Dylan Johnson. I think him and your boy Julius Chestnut are going to duke it out. And then of course, Hassan Haskins is also lurking around in the background.
My boy is strong. I don't know. Is he my boy? You
made his nickname that most people hate, but
a nasty nut, that guy?
Yeah, that guy. So,
yeah, I mean, Dylan Johnson is it's the boring, he's not a boring player, but it is the consensus pick, but it is the correct pick, I think. He had almost 1,200 yards rushing and 16 touchdowns at Washington last year. So I think he's a big time UDFA signing that is going to be a pain in the butt competing for that third running back spot. And it would not shock me at all if the Julius Chestnut experiment is over in lieu of bringing in a Dylan Johnson. But they'll be interesting to watch in the preseason. Along those lines, Jordan, I see here, asks at the final hour, any veteran free agents that we think would fit really well
his whole name.
Roster. Right. Jordan, hang on, I got it.
All right.
Kwamana Quinda.
That's pretty good.
Right?
That's pretty good.
Jordan Kwamana Quinda is phonetically how you pronounce that. I'm sure I nailed that first try. Jordan K asks, any veteran free agents you think would fit really well with the Titans' current roster? Again, going to give the boring consensus answer, but it's Justin Simmons, right? Like this safety market has been pretty bone dry this offseason. There's a reason why there are serviceable starters. There's more than just Justin Simmons out there, but there's a handful of serviceable veteran starters in the safety market still sitting out there. They're going to continue to be there, I think, through OTAs into July. I think that's going to be the market that guys start getting picked off around training camp, mid training camp. And the Titans have already all but said they're going to go and sign a safety. It's a matter of when, not if. So I think Justin Simmons being the number one guy and the Titans having money to spend and a big need at safety. That's the obvious answer for me, JT. I'd have to refresh my memory on what the UDFA, or not UDFA, the free agent market looks like in terms of defensive front. But I wouldn't be shocked if they were to looking to add some bodies up front on defense either. What about you? Is Justin Simmons your answer?
I think Justin Simmons, and also lucky for you, I just pulled up the free agents who are still available. You can talk,
Perfect.
Justin Simmons, I think, is the best one. It's the range of, he's a veteran presence. He's not too old either. But I think that's where that sweet spot would be. I think a couple other ones could be Eddie Jackson, Micah Hyde, Tracy Walker, Marcus May, Javon Curse are all guys who are around 30-ish years old. Micah Hyde, though, 33, maybe not the guy you want to go with. And then, of course, always sitting out there is Jamal Adams, only 28,
Nope. Incorrect. Negative 1,000% chance they bring in Jamal Adams.
But I think that if you were looking at it, I think a guy like Justin Simmons, Eddie Jackson, or maybe even Marcus May could be that guy that they bring in during the summer months. So.
Hey, who's still sitting out there?
Who's sitting out there?
If Will Levis doesn't work out, or he just can't hang, he gets hurt, Ryan Tannehill's still on the market. This Titans team, I like that fit. I think that Ryan Tannehill could work in this offense.
I think so too.
35 years old.
Yeah, I mean, veteran presence.
Gonna be available.
Hey, what if I think this is the question that we can perfectly segue here. Stoney asks, are you guys going to talk about Mason Rudolph stealing the starting job? Well, who knows if Mason Rudolph might even be on the roster, just like Will Levis. If those both guys don't work out, I think you could sign Ryan Tannehill, and also Logan Woodside is also still out there. Two guys I think could be really good fits in this Titan system,
Now I'm curious, Stoney, are you referencing the football, the PFT clip of Shireen Williams the other day talking about how she thinks Will Levis is going to lose his job to Mason Rudolph? Because if so, I heard that and thought it was just as uninformed as you did. If you're not, then you should go listen to it because it's bad. Shireen Williams is good at her job generally, but covering the Titans, she does not do. Is this my going off? It is. Oh,
yeah, I don't know what
it's. I pulled up the free agent thing and it had the video in video ad. Decided it was just going to play for itself. So,
and then finally, the question we can leave today's show on. Logan asked, who would go further in Survivor between you two, Zach, Mike Herndon, and the Big Stone?
That's a good question.
I think here's my ranking, right?
Okay.
I think Stoney won.
What?
Yeah. I think
isn't Survivor primarily a game of athletic strength, or is it mostly like wit?
They don't call him Big Natural for nothing, brother. Like,
I'm not. First of all, let me be clear. I'm not saying any of us in this lineup are particularly elite.
I think he's got the
athletes. We are not.
Yeah, I think he's got the personality to do it. But I would rank it.
I need to know who's the strongest swimmer. I need to know. I mean, in terms of a cunning standpoint, I think Zach is the most backstabby of the group.
Yeah,
he would not hesitate to stab any of us in the back, or frankly, to our faces, just end our lives, cut our throats in order to get to the $1 million. So I don't know. I kind of think I could hang athletically, but I might be too nice to hang. I don't know.
Yeah, I was gonna say my ranking is Stoney, Mike, me, Zach, and then you.
Dead last. So what's your reasoning for me being last?
I don't know. You're just last. Like, I think everyone else has an avenue to win, except you, I guess.
That's tough.
You didn't even know about Survivor like 7 months ago. You didn't even know it was a thing. So
what? Didn't know it was a thing. I know that is not true. You're lying on live television. That's crazy. I know what Survivor is. I just have never watched it religiously. Have you?
I've partaken a season or two. So I understand what's going on.
I know the general concept of it, but I've never watched a full season or anything.
What is your ranking then? Like, okay, mister, like if you had to rank.
I think, well, I mean, like, again, part of it is athletic, part of it is cunning, but also part of it is just like survival, right? Being able to hang on, not.
Stoney said he ran a 4.9 in college. So
well, how long ago was college, Stoney?
I don't know.
How far removed?
I will say, when I was 11, I was my swim club's swimmer of the year. So
I was also in swim club. I also had many medals. I was not swimmer of the year though. So
yeah, well,
I would say I would rank who all is it? It's you, me, Herndon, Zach, and Stoney.
Yeah, the Big Stone.
My ranking would be, my ranking would be Herndon, me, Zach, Stoney, and then you, because screw you.
Yeah, that's fair. That's why I'm voting you off. I'm voting you and Zach off first, and then me, Mike, and Stoney are probably just
I think
gonna,
we're all voting Zach off first because I think
Yes.
we would all see Zach as the most cunning threat.
See, here's the thing. We would all vote Zach off first.
Mhm.
Then I would use my wits to gang up on you and get you off because I think it'd be really funny. And then me, Mike, and Stoney.
I actually think Stoney has a really strong chance just because none of us want to see Stoney go. None of us have any reason to hate Stoney.
True.
He's the most likable in the group.
I just think that me, Mike, and Stoney then are gonna split the money, and then we're just gonna hang out on the island for the rest of the time. You know, like
I don't think that's how that works.
We'll just be straight chilling. You know,
I think
that's how that works.
Roasting a pig over a bonfire.
Yeah.
Drinking margaritas that you found in nature.
Correct.
Okay. So there's your answer, is that we have no idea, Logan. Maybe we need to do a like some kind of, I think, some summer content competing in some sort of physical or mental activity. You've floated like a Titans Jeopardy would be an interesting concept.
Ooh, Titans Jeopardy.
We have floated in the past doing a media combine, also a possibility. So I don't know. Maybe when we get bored in the summer, we'll dive into those things. Sony says he's in. So there we go. That's going to be it for us today. We somehow got over an hour out of today's podcast. So again, we'll be back on Thursday, recapping all of the things we saw and heard at OTA's open session number 2, which is tomorrow on Wednesday. Until then, for producer JT, I'm your host, Easton Freeze. Like, subscribe. We're at 1,000. Let's get to 2,000 by the end of the week. Set your goals high. Set your dreams high. Until Thursday, this has been the Hot Read Podcast. We'll talk to you then.